Okay, there we go. So unfortunately, the recording won't have the quick intro, but it will have the essentials. So Carrie, if you can go to slide 2. Ooh. Hopefully you can go to slide 2. There we go, slide 2. So this is just a very simple visual to give you a sense of where the Partnering for Climate initiative is in the overall climate finance commitment. As you can see, it's a clear sub-element of the new $5.3 billion commitment. And within that, there are 2 distinct components of the Partnering for Climate initiative. There's the $15 million envelope for Indigenous peoples, which is where the goal is for Indigenous people and organizations in Canada to work with their counterparts in developing countries in working on climate change. And then there's a $300 million envelope for gender-responsive nature-based solutions to climate adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa. And I challenge anyone to say that 5 times fast, because there's lots of words in that sentence. So to get us started, I'm going to turn the mic over to Cam Doe, who's going to tell us more about the $5.3 billion commitment and the essential criteria that must be met as part of that funding. So Cam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tina, and so grateful to be here. Thanks for inviting me. First, let me also acknowledge that I'm working from the traditional unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and I go by the pronouns she and her. So on this slide here, this really is just a snapshot of the $5.3 billion that the Prime Minister announced at G7, and really to demonstrate that this new programming is building on the successes from Canada's previous programming since 2010. And as you'll see here, this round of programming is much more targeted and includes several policy parameters that were announced at COP26. And the reason for this is because we realized that it was really hard to tell a coherent story during the $2.65 billion because we hadn't really created a sufficiently strong framework at the beginning. So it was a real lesson learned for us from the previous initiative, and this time around we want to ensure that Canadians know the results of where their money is going. So here quickly, the parameters are, we have a 40% allocation towards climate adaptation, recognizing that we need to help countries adapt to the current climate crisis. There's also a new target of a minimum target of at least 80% of projects that will integrate gender equality. And this is reflecting the alignment to the Feminist International Assistance Policy, since this came after the $2.65 billion and we were trying to retrofit it in afterwards. So we're really starting this from the beginning. And this last target here is the 20%, maybe just go back to the other slide, Carrie, is the 20% of the envelope is going to be supporting the nature-based solutions and projects with biodiversity co-benefit. So it's about a little bit over $1 billion. And we're actually really pleased to see this target because it's recognizing, the intersections between biodiversity and climate change. But it's a little bit terrifying, to be honest, because it is a new thematic area for us, as well as for many of our partners. And then on the right side of the image there, we also have 4 thematic areas, which came as a result of the really, truly extensive consultations we held in the summer of 2020 with many of you around the table here when we developed this new phase of financing. And these discussions really helped to hone in on those 4 areas. For the funding parameters, as you know, Canada uses 2 different types of funding instruments. So now 40% is going to grants, and 60% is going to URCs, or what we call unconditionally repayable contributions. I also ask you to do that 4 times. It's very hard to say. It's basically, those are loans. These are contributions that you have to pay back to GAC, right? And, we continue to believe that these types of instruments are important because we recognize that the public sector, we can't do it alone. We need the private sector to come along and to help us meet both the climate change as well as the SDG goals. So these instruments are really to incentivize, not subsidize, the private sector to take on more risk. So either to go into countries that we don't normally work in, or to go into sectors that they deem to be more risky. And in this space, we tend to work with multilateral or global institutions like the Green Climate Fund. On the grants and contribution side, there's 40% allocation, and we you know, for this one here, we're really pleased to see this increase because the last time around, I believe we only had about 25%. And we know that some of the newer themes, like the NBS themes, is new to our partners, and it's going to be a little bit challenging to find projects with more predictable revenue streams in this space. So next slide is really the mandatory criteria. So this is what you need to be. I hear an echo. I don't know if everybody else hears it, but if you could please mute yourself. Oh, okay. Thank you. So this is really just what you need to meet in order to be eligible for the 5.3. So for us, first and foremost, it has to be climate change, right? This is a climate change fund, and it has to be the principal objective. And so that translates practically into a coding of CC2. As defined by OECD DAC markers. Secondly, as I said previously, it also has to integrate gender. So in DAC terms, this means at least a minimum coding of GE1, but we're aiming for 2 and a 3. I'll let Tina describe all of that. And then it also has to contribute to at least 2 of the 5 objectives. I won't go into them because it's really on our website, and I want to really take this time to look at the 315. And then the last 2 is it has to be eligible for ODA. And then finally, it has to be part of all projects actually have to feed into our new program results framework. And as I said, you know, it's really to help us hone in on those results, talk about a program rather than just the spaghetti of, or what do I call it, throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks. We're really trying to tell a coherent story. So all projects will have to feed into this new log frame. I know that was really quick and a lot of information, so I'm happy to answer questions after. Thanks, Tina.
Thanks, Cam. And I would just remind everyone on the call to please make sure that you're muted, and that will help avoid echoing. And we're trying to go into the meeting settings to turn off that annoying click that everybody joins. Carrie's trying to do that. In the meantime, please bear with us. We're going to keep going through. One thing I forgot to mention at the outset is we would love to know who's here. So I invite you all to go into the chat and tell us which organization you are here representing today. That will give us a sense of kind of the depth and breadth of who we're reaching. I recognize a few names, but there's some new ones on there. So please do that in the chat. Okay, so Carrie, let's go to the next slide. $315 million. Okay. So as I mentioned at the outset, there's 2 distinct envelopes in the $315 million. The first is $15 million for Indigenous peoples, and this is going to be programmed separately from the rest of the envelope. And more details on this funding will follow after in-depth engagement with Indigenous peoples in Canada. So the focus of today's discussion is really to talk about the $300 million. And not get into details on the $15 million. So for the $300 million, as I said, it's for gender responsive nature-based solutions to climate change adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems. These solutions address societal changes effectively and adaptively while providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Now, I hope you've all noticed that there is a website, GAC's website has been updated to include a specific section on the $315 million, which is part of the $5.3 billion on the website. In this website, we have tried to work really, really hard to be as clear and as simple as possible about what the $315 million is focused on, in particular, the $300 million. And so we actually give you examples of these types of projects on the website. What are nature-based solutions, climate adaptation, and things like that. And we also draw your attention to the IUCN standard, which we think is a great tool for organizations and people wishing to work into this space. Now, you may have also noticed, and this is the primary question we're getting to date, which is really funny, that we are not doing a call for proposals for this funding. That's a bit of a different approach for our branch and partnerships because we have tended to use calls for proposals, but it is not that unusual for our Africa branch who we're delivering this with, where they tend to do a mix of unsolicited proposals and calls for proposals. So our thinking is that a traditional call for proposals was not the best suited tool for this space and what we're trying to achieve. Call for proposals, as some of you know, is quite a formal process. And once it's launched, we have very limited ability to talk to organizations and partners. There's a very formal structure for that. Whereas if we go with an open portal seeking unsolicited proposals, we have a bit more flexibility in our systems to have this sort of webinar and engagement session with you where we can speak generally about the funding, answer questions, and hopefully organize future webinars on sub-elements that are of interest. So that's why we're not going for a call for proposals. The next slide, Carrie. So as you know, there are some mandatory criteria that you absolutely must meet if you want to apply for this funding. The very first one is the mandatory criteria that Cam mentioned in the $5.3 billion commitment, and we do have a typo there. We said 5.3 million as opposed to billion. It is billion. That's a typo on our side. And a couple of key ones of those that we want to draw your attention to here is the initiatives absolutely must align with the nature-based solutions and biodiversity logic model outcomes that have been set for the climate finance commitment. So we've recreated those for you here. They're on the website. I'm not going to go through them individually right now. And then the second mandatory criteria, which is really important, is that because this is funding for organizations in Canada, you must be a legally registered organization in Canada in order to apply for the funding and to enter into a contribution agreement with us. Now, we are strongly encouraging and hoping to get some partnership approaches where a range of organizations are going to join together in a partnership approach or a consortia approach, which we think is really interesting and relevant in this space. But the one that submits the proposal and the signatories of the agreement must be organizationally registered in Canada, and that's explained on the website. So we'll go to the next slide. In addition, and this is where we're now going to get a bit more technical, is the very first criteria that must be met is we are looking for climate adaptation projects. So this is the sine qua non, without which nothing. If this is not a climate adaptation project, it will immediately not be eligible for funding under this envelope. And we're specifically looking for a project that reaches the coding level of CC2. This is, again, if you go to the website PartneringForClimate, this is explained. We give you the direct website link to the DAC Rio marker coding and what that means. I can briefly tell you that in order to be considered a principal climate change adaptation project, climate adaptation is fundamental in the design and impact of the investment and is an explicit objective of the investment. And the investment would not have been undertaken had climate adaptation not been an objective. And if you look at our website, it will say that this needs to be reflected not only in your ultimate outcome, but in your intermediate outcome as well. So we do give you a bit of direction in terms of how to do your logic model and your performance measurement system. The other thing, because we're looking for nature-based solutions, the projects must also have a strong biodiversity component. We're looking for biodiversity 1 coding, which is a significant objective. And a significant objective means that the investment meets one or more of the eligibility criteria under biodiversity. Biodiversity is important, but not one of the principal reasons for undertaking the investment. And on the PartneringForClimate website, we do indicate that this should be represented through at least one intermediate outcome, which is focused on that biodiversity co-benefit, and then have that track through the rest of your LMPMF and your theory of change, etc. And then, of course, we are looking for gender integration, a minimum of GE1, but we would really, really encourage you to go for GE2 or GE3 level of coding, consistent with the FIAP, consistent with the priority that our minister is putting on gender integration and the importance that we're putting on it as a department. Now, a number of you on the call have told us that you feel it is possible to get to this level of integration on gender, and so this is the opportunity to do that. For this funding, we're also looking for projects that range in size from a minimum of 15 million to a maximum of 40 million for fiscal years 2022-23 to 26-27, except for the women's rights projects, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the reason for this, again, we've got a few questions on this through the portal, is again, we're two branches working together and we're trying to find a coordinated way. Our projects and partnerships are sometimes a bit smaller. An Africa branch, sometimes they're a bit bigger. So we thought between 15 and 40 million was a nice compromise between the two branches. The other thing is we wanted projects to be sizable enough to be an incentive for you to take a partnership approach or a consortia approach. We also want to incentivize not just single country projects, but also multi-country projects and projects that are taking place around an ecosystem, such as around a watershed, a river basin, a project that's going to look at coastal communities in different countries, or in a dryland or savanna that crosses multiple countries. So we think projects in the range of 15 to 40 million give you the opportunity to do those sorts of initiatives. Of course, to be eligible for this funding, the 300 million, it has to be focused on sub-Saharan Africa and target countries that are eligible for official development assistance. And then the project concepts must be based on and supported by a very robust environmental analysis, and in particular, a vulnerability assessment that captures both the climate change and biodiversity challenges. Now, as you would have seen earlier, that a part of the $300 million is we've done a carve out, or we've earmarked 20 million of that, at least 20 million, to specifically support women's rights and climate adaptation, that intersection. And here, the main principal criteria apply. Again, it has to be primarily climate adaptation with a biodiversity co-benefit, has to align with the overall climate finance logic model, and it must focus on ODA eligible countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But in addition, to apply for this 20 million subcomponent of the 300, you must include women's organizations in developing countries. And we're really here hoping that it will be local women's organizations that you bring into the project and into the partnership approach or consortia. Here, we're looking for gender integration. We want full gender integration up to level GE3. Again, a few of you on the line have reached out to us and you've encouraged us to go this way, and you've assured us that it's possible. So please bring us that amazing CC2BD1GE3 project in this space. And then here we're a bit more flexible in terms of project size. So the minimum project size here is $5 million, again, between fiscal years 22-23 and 26-27. Now, again, you might be wondering about why the 5 million. We've looked at our Women's Voice and Leadership projects. We've also had a number of discussions with organizations like the Equality Fund, with Gaga, and our programs, and we think a minimum project size of $5 million, again, is a nice project size. It gives you an incentive to take those partnership consortia approaches, to maybe consider multi-country, etc. So we'll go to the next slide. So other objectives. You may have noticed on the website that we have the mandatory criteria that I've just gone through, but we also have some other, kind of policy program objectives that we hope to achieve through this. As you've heard me mention, we're really quite keen to take partnership approaches with this funding, and in particular, to mobilize new and non-traditional development partners. Our department hasn't had a lot of grant funding in the environment space or in climate change or biodiversity for quite a long time. So there's tremendous expertise in Canada among the environmental community, for example, and among our universities and researchers and things like that, but they haven't necessarily worked in a development context. So we've got great capacity in different areas, and we hope that by really promoting partnerships, that you will have an incentive and an interest in joining together and bringing together some of the diverse range of experiences and organizations that we have in Canada to build a really strong project team, a consortia, to do some programming. We're also interested in funding projects that will support a wide array of ecosystems in sub-Saharan Africa. We know needs are great. We know that this tranche of funding is important, but it will not be able to address all needs. We are hoping to gain some experience and some great results in different ecosystems. We would like freshwater ecosystems. We're interested in supporting coastal communities. We're interested in dry land, high altitude, low altitude. We really want to look across sub-Saharan Africa and get different experience and different expertise and support a range of needs in the country. We're also interested in looking at approaches and tools for testing solutions, learning and understanding what works and what doesn't. And of course, we've heard from many of you, and it is a priority for us as well to try to take more localized approaches. In any of the development work that we do, local partners and local organizations are a key part of how we work, especially in partnerships grants and in Africa. So we're expecting local partners and local organizations to be there anyway. But we do really want to encourage you to try to be as localized as possible in this approach. So what does this mean at the end of the day in terms of how these additional objectives will be applied? So our expectation is, or our plan is, say we receive 30 project concepts and we sit down as a group to review them. The first thing that we have to do is we have to look at, do they respond to the mandatory criteria? Are they all climate change adaptation projects? Are they all CC2? If you're not climate change adaptation CC2, you're automatically not going to go forward in the process. Is there a clear biodiversity benefit? Is gender integrated? All those other mandatory criteria have to be there. And say that takes us from 30 concept notes down to 25. Well, then how do we look at the rest and decide what to proceed with in terms of a letter of invitation for a full concept? That's when we'll apply these other objectives. We'll look to say, okay, well, let's this project meets all the mandatory criteria and it's focused on wetlands over here. Well, this one's really good. It's targeting coastal communities. And while we have 6 that are looking at, kind of dryland savanna, we can't necessarily fund all 6. So let's look for 3 or 4 that are the best. So we'll apply these criteria to help us narrow down the list of projects to that core that we will invite to full proposal and that we will hopefully fund. So that's how these will be used in our decision-making process. So we'll go to the next slide. So submission process. As I said, this is not a call for proposals. So there is no specific deadline for submission. So we would encourage you to not be too fast, not take too long, find that sweet spot of coming up with a really good solid project concept, submitting it, and then let us review and we'll go forward from there. Now, concept notes must be submitted according to the guidelines for unsolicited proposals. So on our Partnering for Climate website, the links to all of these wonderful things are there. Now, I went through it myself today just to make sure that everything worked and it was fairly logical to go through. I haven't gone through our website application process in a long time, so I'm almost completely new at it. And it was fairly straightforward for me to figure out and work my way through. So I was able to find quite quickly so you're going to be submitting a project concept. That's the first thing. So I was able to find quite quickly, well, what is a project concept? What do you include in that? It is there on the website. Basically, a project concept for a single country proposal is basically 5 pages in English, 6 pages in French. If you're looking at a multi-country initiative, then you get 6 pages in English and about 7.2 pages in French to describe the initiative, to show us how it's climate adaptation too, with the biodiversity benefit, the gender benefit, and those sorts of things. So it is all there. I know our processes and procedures can be a bit much sometimes, but it is there on the website and you can work your way through it. We would like, if you could please make sure that in the title of what you're submitting, please put climate finance in the project title, because that just helps make sure it gets to us. And then of course your concept note has to be submitted through the Partners at International portal, which is directly on our website, and we've recreated it here. Now, to submit Partners at CETA, you have to register. There's things that you have to do with that that are clearly outlined there. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So once we have kind of a core mass or group of project concepts, we're not going to go one by one. We'll wait until we have a few to review at once. We will assess the concept notes against the mandatory criteria that we've outlined previously and against the other criteria that we're interested in as part of this initiative. Our goal is to kind of review those and get back to organizations within kind of 2 months of us receiving the concept note. And we will take one of two decisions. If it's a positive decision, you will receive a letter of invitation from us to submit a full proposal, and that letter will include instructions and steps on what to do next. If we decide not to proceed with your project concept, you will receive a letter explaining the reasons for the proposal's rejection. You can request additional feedback from us. And then based on that feedback, the organization can decide, do I want to submit a new project concept, a revised concept, or not at all. So that's basically what you'll hear from us. It'll either be a positive, let's go for a full project concept, or it'll be a negative, but with an explanation. So we'll go to the next slide, Carrie. There we go. So a key part of this process for us, one of the reasons why we wanted to go with an open portal as opposed to a call for proposals, is that it gives us an opportunity to have a little bit more dialogue and engagement with interested organizations and partners in Canada. This is a new space for you and for us. We haven't programmed in climate adaptation, like wholly climate adaptation projects in a number of years. And we also haven't necessarily done nature-based solutions for climate adaptation either. It's a new area for you and for us. And we realize that we're asking you to do integrated programming, and we're asking you to be very, to meet very specific criteria in terms of how projects are coded with the climate change 2, biodiversity 1, and the GE 1 to 3. So we thought it would be useful to look at future webinars and engagements with you to work through some of these ideas in the initial days, and then over time, as we have full project proposals and approved projects, to turn those discussions into kind of lessons learned, monitoring, evaluation, and those sorts of things. So this introductory webinar will be repeated on Wednesday, mais complètement en français. So that will be on Wednesday. And then after that, we are planning to organize a webinar like this, but to focus on environment and gender coding. And we'll have some of our lead specialists in the call to talk about it in a bit more detail with you. We also think it would be very useful to have a webinar to really talk about nature-based solutions, climate adaptation, and gender equality. To really drill down on how do we get those full integrated projects, how do we get to GE2, GE3. And then the goal is for this to lead over time to a community of practice in this space, which we think would be really, really cool. Now, the way that these webinars and events will work is we've had a preliminary meeting with some of your networks that work in this space, and we'll continue those conversations to help us identify what are your actual kind of needs and interests in terms of ongoing webinars, combined with what are we seeing in terms of the questions that we're getting and the concept notes and things like that. And between us, identify what future webinars could look like. And we're also hoping as Global Affairs Canada to not host them all as well. These two introductory ones absolutely make sense for us to host. Obviously, the one on coding makes sense for us to host. But we wouldn't necessarily have to do one on gender, for example. Perhaps someone else could do that. So please do work with your networks and your organizations here. I'm thinking Cooperation Canada, the Intercouncil Network with BCCIC, the Atlantic Council, ACOC, CIDEP, and then C4D. They'll be reaching out to you, and please be proactive with them in terms of identifying needs and interests for future webinars, and how we can build a really nice community of practice, a Canadian community of practice in this space. So that's the quick run through of the general requirements of the program and how it will all work. We'll now open the floor for questions and comments. So I see that some of you, oh, look at all those wonderful organizations here. That is fantastic. OneDrop, IISD, I saw MEDA, Farm Radio, Sisi Adra Plan. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. That is great. So for questions, please just use the little hand function if you would like to ask a question, or please write it in the chat. I see we've got a couple in there, but I'll start with the floor. So if anyone who would like to go first, or do we want to start with what's in the chat? Don't be shy. We're among friends here. Okay, Kelly, I don't see any hands, so read it. Why don't you read us the question from the chat to get us going, and then I will turn to Adrian. Okay,
Yep.
so
Can
Kelly,
you hear me well, Tina? Can you hear me at all?
can you raise the volume a little bit? Can you raise the volume a bit or speak louder?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, better. Thank you.
All right, so the first question that we have is from Austin from the UN World Food Program. Is the 300 million accessible for multilaterals, not just organizations who are based in Canada?
Yeah. So the short answer to that is no. This funding is focused on organizations in Canada. Now, if an organization in Canada wants to partner with an international organization such as the World Food Program, they can look at that. But there are other avenues and possibilities for multilateral organizations like WFP. This one, the applicant and the group signing the contribution agreement must be organizations that are based in Canada. And in partnership approaches, we'll also be looking to ensure that the organizations as part of the partnerships each have a tangible, substantial role in the project. So we'll be keeping an eye out for maybe a partnership approach where the Canadian organization is more just the signatory of the agreement and the flow through of the funding. No, we want the Canadian organization to have a very clear, strong, relevant role in the partnership approach, along with other organizations, whether multilateral or local. So then I think I saw Adrian, your hand go up, and then Stuart, I think I saw yours after that.
Yes, my question was regarding the concept note. You mentioned it should be about 7 pages, and I was wondering at that level, what do you want to see in? Do you want to go up to the size of the requested budget, the role of all the partners in the partnership models if you are going in partnership? So I don't know if there's a document describing more or less what you want in at that level in the concept note.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. This is defined on the website. When you go through Partners at International, you'll follow the link and it will tell you, it will take you to the process for submitting for the unsolicited proposal submission part of it. And it will give you all of the directions on what is a concept note, including the length, the format, which is just basically Microsoft Word, but it has the font, it has the spacing, and it has also the main elements that we're looking at in the concept note. So there's more there than what we can describe in this short call, but it is all very clearly defined on the website. So please do look at that. And keep in mind, when you look at this information on the website, it is general in that it applies to any development initiative, any sector or things like that. So as you read it, and it says, for example, define the development challenge that your project will address. Well, you're applying for climate finance and specifically gender responsive, nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. So your development challenge that the project is addressing is increasing resilience, reducing vulnerability. It's that climate change, nature-based solution space, but it's all detailed on the website. And it's better to go there than us trying to go through all of those pieces. Okay. Okay. Stuart Taylor, IDE Canada, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tina and Carrie and Michelle and team. This is really, really helpful and very much appreciated. Just a quick question. Doing the math here, we're looking, this particular announcement represents about 15% of the amount foreseen of the total 5.3 billion to go through grant-based mechanism. And looking, and obviously has its center of gravity around nature-based solutions. Looking at the other thematic areas, do you see a similar kind of mechanism coming up around some of these other areas? And we're particularly looking at climate smart ag and food systems, and wondering if we would be looking at a similar kind of mechanism going forward.
Cam, I'll let you answer that one.
Sorry, you cut out. Did you say for me, Tina, to take that one? Yeah.
Yes, please, Cam, if you could.
Okay, sure. So when we do the math in terms of the grant versus loan space, you'll see that over 3 billion is still in loans, right? So that leaves a little bit less than 2 billion, of which, if you look at the 20% target for NBS, 1 billion has to go to NBS. So as you start doing the math and unpacking all of that, it leaves very little room left over for grant funding for any of the other thematics. So really what we're trying to focus in the first year is on NBS projects. So, but the difference is that we're working really closely as well with all the geos, so not just Africa, so that other funding is open to really nature-based solution projects, but with other geographics. And I encourage you to work through our portal and work through our geos, because that's how we're getting the proposals for the granting side.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cam. The next question I had is from N. Looker, and I'm sorry, that's the name that's coming up on the screen. And then I have Laura Sewell. So, Mr. N. And you are muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Are you able to hear me now?
Perfectly.
Okay, excellent. It's Norman Looker from Burnside calling or speaking. Thank you very much for this introductory webinar. Can you tell us a little bit about how rates for individuals that are included ultimately in proposals to be determined? I noticed that there are, in addition to several nonprofit organizations on this call, there are also some private sector firms. So can you give us a brief outline of how rates will be determined for individuals that would be on a proposed project team?
Michelle, would you or Brian have the answer to that? That's a bit beyond my current knowledge. And if not, it's one we might have to revert back to you on, Norman. But Michelle or Brian?
Just want to make sure that I understand the question correctly. You mean the salary rate when you're talking about the rate of individual?
Billing rate. We're Cowater, Burnside, several other private sector firms have billing rates, which includes profit. And so when we're bidding on projects funded by the World Bank, or previously when CEDA and Global Affairs actually had requests for proposals, we submitted our billing rates. And so I'd like to know what would be acceptable billing rates.
So I might not have the complete answer here. When we work with private sector organizations with official development assistance, there is no place for any kind of profit out of the project. So I don't know what those billing rights include and what it would include, but in this, let's say, initiative or this funding envelope, it would have to be like at the exact cost of delivering the program of the project that is proposed.
So no profit on billing rates.
Yes, that's it.
And what about the 12% that used to be permitted as call it an administration fee, or whatever you want to call it?
That remains, we call it the overhead cost. That remains a flat rate of 12% over the eligible costs of any project. But again, it should be for costs that are incurred that are not eligible costs, like the administration, like you said, but it should not be seen as a profit out of the project.
But it is, so if someone submits a proposal for $10 million, then that overhead cost would be 1.2 million. Correct?
If it's a global affairs contribution to the project, 12%, yes.
And does the firm need to provide details on how that 1.2 million is, quote, spent?
No, not necessarily. No. There's no financial reporting to provide on that 12%. But again, I would encourage you to look at the Global Affairs Canada website, where we have a specific directive and guidelines around overhead costs, and that explain what is considered a eligible overhead cost and what is not. For instance, if you are using overhead to provide financial incentives to one or many of your employees, that would not be considered like an eligible indirect cost of the project. So down the way, if there is something that comes up and we realize that the overhead has been used for something else, that what is usually acceptable for overhead costs, then yes, there could be some problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle. That's great. So I'm going to turn to Laura and then Ralph, and then we'll pick up some of the questions that are in the chat. So Laura, over to you.
So my question is a bit of a follow-on from Stu's question about some of the other parts of the logic model that are presented with the climate financing opportunity. I think it's great to see the nature-based solution under 1,400, but I think a lot of us here would be interested in some of the other intermediate objectives, especially 1,200 and 1,300. So what I understand from Cam's answer is that this is something we should be approaching bilateral branches, bilateral programs about directly. The other question I wanted to ask is about the instructions mention about unconditionally repayable contributions, but I'm wondering what the position is on conditionally repayable contributions in the intersection with GAC's innovative finance pilot here for this funding.
So for this funding, the 300 million, we do not want URC or CRC proposals. We want more traditional grant-based projects. We think it's already enough to expect partners to give us a full climate adaptation, nature-based solution, gender project without looking at innovative finance. So for the 300 million, we're looking for good, solid, traditional grant projects with no CRCs and no URCs. And again, the focus is gender responsive, nature-based solutions for climate adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa. So some of those other sectors that Stu mentioned, as Cam said, it's not for this tranche of funding, it's for other parts of the 5.3. Ralph, over to you.
Yeah, hi, Ralph. Connecting in from Ethiopia. Can you hear me at all?
Loud and clear.
You are crystal clear.
Oh, wow. My data network is terrible here, so it's a miracle. But I'm working, yeah, I'm in Ethiopia right now. So the question I have is more in regards to partnering with indigenous organizations in Canada. I'm just wondering, could you explain just a little bit more what that looks like? I saw some notes about that.
Ralph, are you talking about the 15 million?
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of additional information to share on that because that our sister division is leading on that, and they're working very closely with Indigenous peoples, the national Indigenous organizations, talk further about that funding and what it may support and how it may work. So it's not really there's not really a lot to share other than to say that discussions have just started and will be ongoing on this funding envelope, and it's not really something that we can get into today. I would say that any organization that is registered in Canada can obviously apply for the 300, including an Indigenous organization, National Indigenous organization. And of course, we would love to see Indigenous organizations as part of a partnership or consortia approach under the 300 million. But the 15 million is on a separate track, and so that one is pending further discussions.
So it's possible then within that 300 million, there could also be sort of a partnership that, you know, we could have ongoing projects within countries. My organization's involved in Rwanda, Ethiopia, and we could partner with Indigenous groups to kind of join us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, that would work from a localization approach, from a partnership approach. So yes, absolutely, that is possible under the 300 million. Kelly, do you want to flag a couple of questions from the?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me well? So
Yes.
we've got a question from Gregory. From the 300 million, is there a set amount of funding available per year? And follow-up questions, can an organization submit more than one proposal to this initiative? And will these initiatives be expected or allowed to include research components? Like a 3 double-decker questions.
Okay, so no, there is no fixed amount per year yet, because this is an unsolicited proposal process. The amount per year is really going to depend on what we get for project concepts. So we would encourage you to try to get us good solid project concepts in a reasonable period of time. We'll review, we'll assess, and where possible and as possible, we'll update the website to indicate how much funding might be left. We can update the website to say, okay, we've got lots of projects on freshwater ecosystems, so we aren't looking for more projects in this space. So we'll try to keep the website up to date, but there's no set amount per year as part of the 300. Can an organization submit more than one concept note? If you want to, of course, and you can apply for the 300. And as Cam said, there are other opportunities for the $1 billion in grant space in other parts of the department. You can apply for those as well as you want. And did I miss one of the questions, Kelly?
No, sounds good. There was just a last aspect of it. Is there any expectations for Canadian public engagement in the project?
Well, we do have some expectation. I mean, we have the visibility and recognition clause that is a component of our contribution agreements, and organizations are always encouraged to do some on public engagement and outreach, but we haven't set a specific component as part of this initiative, no, but the visibility and recognition clauses will be there for sure.
Sorry, if I can just jump in. This is Gregory from Care Canada. I'm just wanting to, there was one part of my question that was missed, and thanks for your patience. Wanting to see, given the focus on learning what works best, will in this funding initiative, there be an openness on Global Affairs' part to including research components, something that has been a little bit more challenging in the past?
Oh, the research component. Sorry, I knew I was missing a part. Thank you for clarifying that. We hadn't specifically thought for or against that. If it makes sense in the project concept that you're proposing in terms of helping us achieve the objectives that we're looking for, nature-based solution, gender-responsive nature-based solution in climate adaptation. If there's a research component that makes a lot of sense there, it could fit into the additional criteria, which could be the learning, the testing, the trying. We would be open to considering it, yes. So Kelly, any other questions in the chat? I see one in the chat about the timeline for the projects. So we have as Cam said, we have 5 years of funding. It's a very specific set of time for the funding. So these projects are limited in time according to the funding. So I believe we're at fiscal year 22-23, and then it would go to 26-27. That's all we can count on for now. That's what we know. That's what we have. So the projects will have to work within that time frame. I know it's a bit short. I know adaptation is a long-term thing, but this is one of those realities of government funding. Sometimes it's our funding tranches are not as long-term as some of the challenges that we're trying to address. So the initiatives the funding will need to be used in the timeframes indicated. Any others from the chat, Kelly?
Yep, we'll go with one from Plan Canada. What is the approach for non-nature-based solution activities? Does the ultimate outcome for all projects have to be 1,000 improved low-carbon, climate-resilient economies, or can this be adapted?
So Cam, that sounds like one for the broader envelope.
Yeah, so for all projects, you just have to meet one of those intermediate outcomes. So as long as you reach a CC2, and whether it's other mitigation or adaptation, then you've met the criteria. So for this one, as Tina mentioned, this one will reach the CC2 adaptation side. We're expecting a lot of our URC, so the loans, that's where we're really going to hit the mitigation side.
Thanks, Cam. Anything else in the chat, Kelly? Or have we got all the questions?
Still a few lingering questions. Moving on, we've got one about the scope of the funding. So beyond the 300 million for Sub-Saharan Africa, will any further climate finance funding be allocated towards Latin America and the Caribbean?
Cam, I believe you've already said the answer to that is yes. It's just this $300 million that is limited to Sub-Saharan Africa, but there are other opportunities for programming in other ODA eligible countries.
Exactly. And Stuart, I'm going to respond to your email, to your chat here.
All right. Next step. If a concept note is coded GE3, is it necessary for it to be included in women's rights and climate adaptation? And is it limited to the 5 million, or can it be considered as a $15 to $40 million project?
That's a really good question. So the 20 million earmarked is really to look at the intersection of women's rights and adaptation. And so one of the criteria for that funding is obviously GE3, but we're also looking for initiatives with women's organizations. So that's a key part of the 20 million is we want to see women's organizations, and in particular local women's organizations, as part of the project concept. So if you're working with local women's organizations, it's GE3 and you've got the climate and adaptation part, then you're in that 20 million space and the minimum project size is 5 million. But beyond that, if you have another initiative, which is climate change 2, biodiversity 1, and you think you can do GE2 or 3, and you're not only working with local women's organizations, you have other partners and things like that, then yes, of course, you can apply for other parts of the 300 million, and you can look at the project size of 15 million to 40 million. It's just when we were looking at working with local women's organizations, we didn't want to set the bar too high with 15 million, but absolutely, if you can get us the CC2 BD1 GE3 elsewhere, then absolutely we would love to see that project concept note.
All right, last one for now. Is it expected that consortium partners include Canadian organizations? And are UN agencies, for example, UNEP, allowed as consortium partners?
Yeah, so partnership approaches and consortia, are not limited to only Canadian organizations. They can have Canadian organizations, they can have local organizations, they can have national organizations, they can have multilateral organizations, etc. The key is that there has to be a clear, distinct role and value of the organizations that are being proposed for the partnership or consortia approach. And the Canadian partner cannot just be the flow through for submitting the proposal and signing the agreement. The Canadian partner has to have a strong, substantial role in the project concept and project delivery. So that's, and I mean, it has to be registered and all those things on the website. So yes, so we are looking for obviously very strong presence and partnership role from Canadian organizations, but depending on the concept and the area, they can bring in other partners and organizations as they think suit the purpose and as they think will build the strongest team possible and get us the best result possible. And then Kelly, I think I saw a quick question about whether a multi-country project has to be focused around a common ecosystem or watershed. No, not necessarily. I mean, partnership branch, we often, we do multi-country projects and they're not connected through a watershed or an ecosystem. It's just because these are climate adaptation projects, there is a certain logic to working at an ecosystem level, for example, the riparian states of a watershed, for example. But no, that isn't the only definition of multi-country project. A multi-country project could be defined differently. It doesn't have to be around a specific ecosystem. It's just, it is an opportunity with this funding should organizations be interested.
Next question for you, Tina. Can you expand on how GAC plans to matchmake between Canadian organizations and just making partnerships?
So we're not matchmaking per se. There are lots of development and environment organizations and networks in Canada. What we will do is, our goal is to host a few more of these outreach and engagement sessions where you can see who's here, you can hear each other's ideas and concepts, and hopefully have ideas yourself of who to reach out to and how to network and work. And as we build and get into that community of practice and the learning by doing space of this, there will be more opportunities to get to know each other, to meet and exchange and things like that. But no, technically, Global Affairs Canada is not going to be doing matchmaking. Like, we're not going to get a concept from one organization and a concept from another organization and bring them together. We don't do that. But we're hoping the outreach and engagement sessions and working more closely with the various networks in Canada will help some of that. It can also happen at the country level with various countries in sub-Saharan Africa and through our community of practice. But no, we're not matchmaking. That's no GAC Tinder.
So I can't see them, Tina, but I think there are some hands raised.
Okay, I can't see them either. I don't have them on the screen and I don't see them in the participants. So I will turn to the floor. Does anyone from the floor have a question that they want to raise outside of the chat?
I have.
Here's a hand. I have Hillary, and then I'm sorry, who was that just?
Adrian.
Okay. So Adrian, you've already asked one question, so let me start with Hillary because she hasn't asked a question, and then we'll come to you, Adrian.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Hillary with the Equality Fund. Thanks for bringing us together on this, really helpful. Just wondering about the environmental analysis and vulnerability assessment. Does that come with the concept note or the full proposal? And will we get more guidance on that?
So Michelle?
It will come at the second stage, at the full proposal stage, and you will be provided more information on how to do that when if you receive a letter of invitation. At the concept note, what we want to see is, like Tina said, do you have a clear understanding of what is the development challenges? And these challenges should be linked to climate adaptation and biodiversity loss. So that's the only element that should, be integrated in your concept notes regarding environmental analysis. But the full environmental analysis and the vulnerability assessment will be at the second stage.
Thanks, Michelle. Adrian, over to you. And then I saw Tiffany's hand go up.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the deadline. You mentioned there's no deadline, but at the same time, you said it has to be between 2022, 2023, and the end of the project is 2026, 2027, more or less. So is there at least a time frame for submission? And also something I wanted to know is sub-Saharan Africa, but what if someone is working outside this area? Are they still, if you have partnership, or at least if you want to implement part of your project in beyond sub-Saharan Africa, still be in Africa, is that being considered acceptable? And the last one was about the concept note again regarding the financial aspect. Up to what details of the budget can we give in the concept note at this level, at the level of the concept note?
Okay, so thank you, Adrian. So the time frame for submissions, there is none. It's an open portal. There is no deadline. So organizations are advised to use their best judgment and submit a concept note when you feel you have a good quality concept note to do so. This is not necessarily a first come, first serve initiative, because we're going to really be looking for good quality proposals. There's a lot of mandatory criteria to meet. There's other objectives we're hoping to fulfill. So our best advice is find that sweet spot of doing what is necessary to submit a really good concept note. They're short. You don't have a lot of detail to give. Concept notes are not meant to incur a lot of cost for organizations. We're not expecting, you shouldn't necessarily need to travel for them. You shouldn't necessarily have to incur a lot of expenses to pull together, if any expenses, to pull together a concept note. So you have to just use your best judgment for that. Outside sub-Saharan African partner, the $300 million has to be spent in sub-Saharan Africa. So you can have a project partner from another part of the world, but the project activities and the project funding is for work in sub-Saharan Africa. So we can't have a project where some disbursements would be made in a Latin American country and some in sub-Saharan Africa. This is for projects in sub-Saharan Africa. So we would expect the expenditures to be in sub-Saharan Africa, and obviously the Canadian organization, if they have overhead costs, from their office in Canada, that's fine, that's normal. But project activities and expenses are expected in sub-Saharan Africa. Financial aspects of a concept note, I would really encourage you to go to the website and look at what's required for a concept note. It is not requiring a detailed project budget, but there are possibilities of including some relevant annexes to the concept note to present your project idea. But the specifics and the details are there on the website. So I had Tiffany next, and then I think it's Maliha Haswari. I hope I'm pronouncing that well.
That's absolutely right. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Tiffany Coberstein from ID Canada. Just wondering if there's a preference for countries in which GAC already has a presence within sub-Saharan Africa, either whether the project in whole or even in part is in one of those countries.
Ryan, would you like to speak to this one?
Yeah, I've been chomping at the bit to get in. No, so we have intentionally made the decision, because this is really I mean, one of the really exciting things about this initiative is that it's intentionally trying to build out community of practice in a new programming area. So we really decided that we wanted to be driven by the best ideas that are coming up from the CFO community. So no, there's no requirement that it be in countries where GAC operates. Now, that being said, so GAC, we do, as you probably all know, we do have a fairly good swath of coverage across the continent, across the subcontinent. We have 18 development programs that are serviced by 16 missions, and they're pretty well dispersed so that we have fairly good coverage across all of the major or most of the major ecosystems on the subcontinent. So we do see the value, and we're hoping that you as partners, when you're building consortia, you see the value of operating in countries where we have a presence, because we're seeing this as a long-term initiative to build, like Tina had said, to build that community of practice. And so, you know, where we do have a presence, we can help with networking, we can help with making linkages within the environment and climate change programming community with the local authorities, both at national and regional and local level, and all of those types of things to amplify the progress that the initiatives make on the ground. So we do hope that there is overlap, but no, it's not a requirement that there be overlap. One last thing while I have the mic, if I could, I did want to stress one of the things that Tina had mentioned around sort of some of the additional considerations, and that being the importance of local solutions and local organizations within these consortia that you're building. So again, going back to this idea about being really intentional about building a community of practice and really sort of putting Canada's best foot forward in the area of NBS climate programming. We really see part of building that expertise and building it in a way that's sustainable and durable on the local level is that there are strong partnerships with African organizations, and that the ideas are often infused with African thinking, African expertise as well. That is definitely something that will be one factor that we look at very closely when we're reviewing proposals. So hopefully that answers your question to me. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. So then I have Malika, and then I saw Philippe after that.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you to the entire team for putting up this wonderful webinar for all of us. It's certainly very exciting to see that the initiative on climate change is having or getting so much attention. Just a couple of questions, since this is going to be this is pretty much a new initiative that GAC is taking, and even for the organizations such as Save the Children Canada, if we want to delve more on this while doing our concept note, is there any focal point available for us to reach out to for further questions if they are not on the website? How does that all entail? And just one or two more questions. Does the 5% match still stand as to-do thing if we end up taking this proposal forward? And organizations and partners like IUCN and WWF that have a relatively excellent name in the world of conservation and climate change, would partnering with these kind of organizations give our concept notes or proposals more of a weight? Thank you.
So I'll just take on the last part of that question, and then Michelle, I'll turn to you for the rest of it. Would an IUCN or a WWF give your proposal more weight? That depends on what is the project concept and what is the proposed role of the various partners in the project. IUCN and WWF are very strong organizations. But there are others. So what I would say is it really depends on the project concept, what objectives you're trying to achieve, and then how those partners would be used in terms of delivering the project. So I can't say yes or no, because it really depends on the project concept, and it depends on the role of the various organizations as part of the consortia. Michelle, do you want to talk about some of the other technical questions that she raised?
Yeah, you might. I might need to have my mind refreshed. But on cost share, I just responded to the same question in the chat. So the cost share policy remains. It's 5% of all eligible costs, and it can be either or a mix of cash and nature. And I don't know what was the other technical question.
That was it. That was on the, and the other one was on the focal point when, if we do need to raise any questions while we are working on a concept note, is there anybody who's going to be available to us, or is it just kind of navigating our own information through the website that's available on GAC portal?
So on the GAC portal, you'll see that we have a generic address. Now, I want to be clear that we cannot co-design concept with you. So we will answer any questions that are technical regarding, what this coding or where I can find this information, but we won't be able to tell you, is this concept acceptable or this element of the concept acceptable? So be very cautious of what kind of questions you will send to this email address. But yes, if you have technical questions, the email address, I will put it in the chat as well, just to make sure. But we will be able to answer you.
Thank you so much.
And the other thing that I would emphasize is one of the important criteria with this open portal process is we have to work as hard as possible to maintain a very open and transparent and level playing field for any organization that wishes to apply to this. So that's why, as Michelle said, we can't co-design, we can't co-develop, we can answer technical questions, and we can have a few webinars like this where anyone who's interested can come together and in a very transparent way ask questions, get answers, so everyone has the same information, and then the recordings will be made available as well. I had and then I see Norman has a second question.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you, Tina. Michelle answered my question was about the cash sharing. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Norman, you wanted to ask a quick second question?
Yeah, I just didn't clearly hear the answer to that question about cost sharing. You said cash or something, and I didn't understand what the something was. In kind, or what was the other part of the question? I did not understand that. And please be as clear as possible. Like on a private sector firm can't raise money. Like we're not like a WaterAid or a Care Canada that can go out to their donors and get 5%. A private sector firm like Burnside or Co-Water or others can't go out and raise 5%. So on a $10 million job, it's not clear to us exactly where that $500,000 is supposed to come from.
Michelle?
I come from the private sector, Norman, so I clearly understand that. There is many questions, and I understand your situation. We have the mechanism for this 300 million that is what we have. So we work with grant, work with ODA and all the policies that are with it. For the 5%, what I'm saying is that you can contribute 5% of all eligible costs of one project, either by paying in cash or by contributing in nature by your employee giving times on the project or by giving some assets to the project. Or it can be a mix of cash and in nature or in kind, if you want.
Okay, so let's say for the sake of argument that we give 100 person days of somebody's time. How is that dollar amount determined? Is that based on their full cost, which is typically about 1.3 or 1.4 times salary?
Well, we will have to compare the job description with the market value for someone doing the same job, and then at the negotiation phase, at the budget negotiation phase, we'll see if it's deemed reasonable, and if so, then we will say that the cost share will be contributed by in kind for this project. So it could be 100%.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle and Norman. I have Geneviève, and then Mercedes, who wish to ask a question. And then Kelly, I'll come to you for a final one or two from the chat box. So Geneviève. Geneviève, you're muted. No, still can't hear you. Oh, no. No, we can't hear you, Geneviève. Okay, so if you haven't, could you put your question in the chat and we can look at it that way? And I'll turn to, thank you, great. And Mercedes.
Thank you so much for that. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Just wanted a clarification in terms of the eligible organizations. In my case, I represent a small and medium-sized organization, an SMO, according to GAC's definition. I didn't find any specific requirements on the guidelines, on the requirements that you explained as well. I just wanted to know whether, in the case this is an SMO who is submitting this proposal, should be complying with all the requirements as outlined by GAC, or it doesn't matter at all.
So our criteria is a bit more general. This is not, we're not targeting any specific subgroup or group of Canadian organizations. It's open to organizations in Canada. As long as you're legally registered in Canada and have a Revenue Canada number and can sign a contribution agreement and things like that, you can apply. Michelle, would you add anything to that? I think that's a pretty straightforward answer. As long as you're a legally registered organization in Canada with the Revenue Canada status, and you can sign a contribution agreement, you can enter into consortia, you can apply, those sorts of things. Kelly, do you want to give us return to questions in the chat?
Yeah, well, I'll actually bridge back to Geneviève's question. She wanted to know, is the participation of country relevant ministry a prerequisite in the concept note, similar to bilateral projects?
Brian, do you want to take this one on?
Having some technical trouble, but yes. No, I don't think there is specifically a requirement for the ministries to be involved. What we do want to see is alignment with national priorities, though. So I think that's a little bit more art than science, but we would like to make sure that there is sort of a credible link to how the NBS elements of the NDCs or the national adaptation plans or the various sort of sub-sectoral plans at the national ministry level have been integrated into the proposal. But no, it doesn't have to be via the ministry. That really depends on the type of program that you're looking at doing.
Great, thanks, Brian. Kelly, any other questions from the chat?
Just one that's lingering around. Are there priority sub-Saharan countries, or are all countries equally rated or defined by relevant ecosystem and needs?
So Brian, this one kind of speaks to you again.
Sorry, my system cut out there. Can you reread that, Kelly?
Yes, of course. Are there priorities? Oh, I think someone's not muted. Are there priority sub-Saharan countries, or are all countries equally rated or defined by relevant ecosystems or needs?
Yeah, we sort of touched on that a bit at the outset. We of course in GAC we have priority countries and we have development programs in 18 countries in the subcontinent. But for this initiative, that's not the guidance that we're giving. So we're really, like I said earlier, we want to be able to follow the best ideas that are coming from the CSO community. So programming where you see the opportunities and where you see the opportunities to really advance and achieve results in the NBS area. I'll go back to what I said before. We do hope that there's some overlap, and we do, obviously, we have the ability to both, support and amplify the programming results that a project achieves where we have a presence. So we do hope that there's overlap, but no, it's not. The decision is that you shouldn't be guided by where GAC is operating.
Great, thank you, Brian. And Kelly, I saw a question a little earlier in the chat that I don't think that we've talked about, which is a coding question. And it's from Adra. If a GE3 level indicates that all outcomes in the logic model are general gender equality outcomes, is there room to adjust the wording of the climate finance outcomes, or must they remain as stated? So that's a really, really good question. And it's kind of at the heart of what we, a bit of a learning curve that we're all on in terms of how do we get a project that's coded BC2, BD1, GE2 or 3. Michelle, do you want to take on that one with coding as best we can? And there'll be a future webinar on this one.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I fear it could be a rabbit hole if we start in the coding right now, but we will definitely have sooner than later a webinar specifically on coding and how to integrate those different coding, because it has been a challenge on our side too, just to figure out how we will bring those 3 codes in one theory of change and logic model.
Yeah, from our internal discussions, we know we have to take a more integrated approach, and that we can't necessarily have separate and individual intermediate outcomes for everything that we have to do. Some of them are going to have to be integrated and then follow that through as you go down your performance measurement framework and your logic model, and have that carry through into your project concept, your theory of change, and things like that. But more to come on that. Kelly, anything else from the chat?
Yes, we have. Could you please provide an estimate of when guidance for a nature-based solutions call for concept notes will occur for geographic regions other than sub-Saharan Africa?
Okay, well, Partnerships Branch is not planning to do a call in that space. Cam, do you have anything on this?
Yeah, so similar to us, we're not planning to do any calls, having learned from just the history of GAC. So the guidance itself will be very similar, right? Like what is nature-based solutions and so forth. So it's irrespective of where the region is. So I would encourage everybody who is interested in the coding, what it means, the NBS webinars, to attend those future webinars. So we'll have someone on our team as well being part of those discussions.
Yeah, so the plan is as we go forward and we drill down into some of these sub details, we'll bring in the right people from Global Affairs Canada. Today we wanted more of a general high level discussion, so we just wanted fewer representatives. The discussion on coding, we'll make sure that we have the specialists there, and if we do decide to do one on nature-based solutions, then we'll have the people in the room from our side who can really speak to the guidance and what it means and things like that. And also, as part of a learning by doing approach, we don't pretend to have all the answers or solutions either. We know there's tremendous talent in the Canadian community and tremendous expertise. So also, if one of you would be interested, or one of your networks would be interested in hosting a more focused discussion on that and bringing relevant people in to talk about, say, nature-based solutions along with us, that would be fantastic as well. And that's also an idea that you could either bring to one of the networks, or you could send to us directly by the email address that you have for us. So we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything else from the chat, Kelly, or have we gotten all of the most of the questions there?
Still have new questions. We have one last question. It's a little bit of a longer one. In terms of the intersection of gender equality and climate change, You know what? I have been mistaken. I think we're all good for the questions.
I just want to underline something. I've been responding in the chat, but just to be clear, if you get a letter of non-invitation to submit a full proposal, you can resubmit a concept afterwards. It's an unsolicited proposal mechanism, so there is no closing time. You are allowed to resubmit. Same thing if you submit a full proposal and it's decided that we will not fund this project, then you can restart and submit a new concept and go through the mechanism again. So it's really what we wanted. We didn't want to be stuck in a very rigid framework. So yes, you can resubmit.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a great clarification, and one of the advantages of going with this process over a call for proposals, because with a call for proposals, if it's a rejection, it's a rejection. That's it. That's all. Whereas here, we have a bit more flexibility. Okay, so by my time, we're coming up to the end of our session. Please thank you from all of us here at Global Affairs Canada for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for all of the great questions that you've given us verbally and in the chat. As we said, this is recorded, and so we'll be able to make it available afterwards. We're not quite sure we can put it on our website because of our accessibility requirements, but it will be accessible somewhere somehow, and we'll make sure we get that out. Please do go to the website, read the information. If you have a technical question, use the email address to follow up with us. We will be compiling some of the more common questions and putting those on the website as well. And as mentioned, the sister presentation to this will take place on Wednesday in French. So thank you all very, very much, and have a great rest of day.
Thank you.